And this is where the story gets interesting. The paper trail for Electrovair 1 had Jalal as the main scientist in charge for research and development, and the subsequent building for Electrovair 2 didn't. How could he be the main scientist of the Electrovair 1 and not even be mentioned in the building of Electrovair 2? The answer was military applications. I can say without any hesitation that the team of Jalal and his friend George Spix are solely responsible for the creation of the very first fully functional, high-performance electric car. After meeting with Jalal and his wife, it was easy to find George. He was still living in the same house that Jalal remembers him relocating 2 years ago. It was right down the street from the entrance of his old stomping grounds, the General Motors Research Laboratories. Driving down the tree-lined street in the heart of Warren, it reminded me of days gone by with the passing ranch-style homes. George was very excited to meet us, and he invited his entire family. As the kitchen began to fill with the presence of loved ones, and the smell of fried chicken permeated the room, I began to understand George. Not only did I begin to understand George, I understood why Jalal was so drawn to him.
But like George Spix, when I built, the pieces together, he was helping with the technicians, and so on.
George and you were pretty good friends though, right?
Yes, he was working with me. We were very friendly.
George and Jalal were brilliant men, and they shared a common idealism. This was a common occurrence with some of the men I had met. They all began wanting to change the world, but sometimes that just wasn't possible when navigating the corporate structure of the GM Defense and Research Laboratories. It was for this reason that a lot of them decided to pursue employment and research work elsewhere. The ones that stayed had to have thick skin and be proficient at navigating these political situations.
I think the person who could have given me credit because he knew that I'd come up with a concept, and it was documented by the director of our lab, Dr. Howard Wilcox. Agarwal knew, and he gave oodles of articles, papers, speeches and all that, and never once did he give me credit for having come up with the concept of the electric drive. That's why my contribution lay in obscurity for 50 years.
George and Jalal would become very close when they started at the General Motors Defense Laboratories. Jalal had come up the hard way, and George had suffered through the Great Depression that struck his family hard. The truth is, Jalal was the genius behind the creation of Electrovair 1, and George was his electrical engineer that helped him assemble the car. But Jalal thought the world of George. So much so that Jalal would include his name on the technical thesis papers that would be distributed nationwide upon the creation of the very first high-performance electric car that they created together. This relationship would stand the test of time, and both of them still tear up when asked if they miss each other. In a prior episode, I spoke of the circumstances that Jalal had to live through with the realization of his lack of citizenship by Paul Agarwal, while employed in technology that would ultimately lead to lunar vehicle applications.
But I think maybe it has to do with the fact that I didn't have citizenship, because when I came here, and when I'm working at that time in general, I didn't have the U.S. citizenship. I mean, they don't want the foreigner to get involved in defense,
Well, George lived through it too. He may have not realized it at the time because it was as natural to him as breathing, but he had remained loyal to Jalal throughout it all. These two men created one of the greatest advances in the 20th century, and for reasons beyond their understanding and control, were sent to the commercial division within the Electric Drive group. They would make the most of it, but our story paints a different picture of the commercial division, where the greatest minds were sent to not be involved in the military applications anymore.
Another combination of power sources is represented in this vehicle. A gasoline engine, or any prime mover, powers a generator which drives electric motors located at each vehicle wheel. On a level road, perhaps only one wheel would be powered. On a steep grade, 2 or 3 or all might be in use. This Delco-Remy electric wheel propulsion system has potential for some military and commercial applications, but cost factors make it non-competitive in passenger car applications for the foreseeable future.
George was so proud of his work with Jalal and the General Motors Defense Laboratories that he saved every piece of original documentation that he could leave the building with on a daily clipboard. Those documents sat in a dusty basement for 50 years waiting for someone to ring that doorbell that fateful day. The kids were there and they all agreed. Take the papers and make Dad a hero. And that's what we did. I know I usually tell the life history of these men, but George created a life story of his own years ago and distributed it to his children to remember their late mother by. I was struck by the innocence and the honesty of this story. This was almost a decade ago, and he didn't realize we were coming. He's a humble man, and he moved heaven and earth every day just for the love of his family. Not a single word of the story he wrote said a word about General Motors. There is no overbearing ego in this man. He helps create the world's very first high-performance electric car that could perform with his gasoline counterparts, saves all the original paperwork that has his name all over it, is ordered to personally destroy Electrovair 1 and save all the valuable parts, is in charge of delivering the 4 F-car pilot prototypes to the experimental garage after the Lunar reliability testing, and doesn't even mention it in his story. This is a man I strive to be.
These 4 builds, number 28, number 29, number 30, and number 49, all developed in prototype stages without a drivetrain, all originally intended to be the beneficiaries of the ultra-high performance options as prototypes, all intended for end use at the experimental garage for final development and testing. We're about to become the most historically significant Camaros ever built, and possibly the most historic 4 cars to ever be hand-built by General Motors. That's where our historical research takes an amazing twist. One of the divisions that Frank Ballou was asked to cooperate with, through the urging of Tom Putnam, was the electric drive division of Dr. Paul Agarwal. This division had created the first high-performance electric cars, known affectionately as Electrovair 1 and Electrovair 2, and was being relocated back to the General Motors Research Laboratories from their land division at the General Motors Defense Laboratories in Santa Barbara, California.
When you first see it, Electrovair looks like any other car. But when you get into it, 500 volts replaces the fuel tank, and an electric motor takes the place of an engine.
Their budget had been substantially lowered, and they were in the final stages of testing an electric drive mock-up with a truly historic application, the electric propulsion of the proposed Lunar vehicle. With time of the essence and budgetary constraints that were formidable, Tom Putnam was asked to orchestrate and provide budgetary cover for this program's final reliability testing. The idea of all the men involved would be that these 4 builds would be loaned to Dr. Paul Agarwal's division for their expedited testing and then returned to the experimental garage for final development, mock-up and testing as Chevrolet's answer to the need for a highly competitive, ultra-high performance car on the street and racetracks. The cost of these programs would be absorbed by 3 divisions: sales, electric drive, and fleet and service. Additionally, it was originally perceived to be accomplished shortly after the commencement of the assembly line in Norwood on August 7th of 1966. Now, in all fairness, no one had ever tested electric drive mock-up in this way, nor had anyone ever planned on the complexities of doing this Lunar reliability testing simultaneously with the uprooting of an entire division, their engineers, their scientists, and their families from halfway across the country. Suffice it to say, this testing took much longer than originally intended. Additionally, the complexities of loaning these 4 bills to scientists and engineers with completely different job skills from their consumer-oriented development counterparts were massively miscalculated. In fact, in many ways, it's almost humorous. Although the time frame of this testing was not accomplished as originally perceived, it did lead to the development of the astronaut mobility training vehicles, one of which was utilized by astronauts Louisma and Carr in Pismo Beach, California in 1968. These training vehicles would ultimately lead to the creation of the final lunar vehicle that was built primarily by General Motors and utilized in the Apollo missions. Additionally, the technology was outlined with military and consumer applications known as the shopper car. Would ultimately lead to the creation of the Sterling Electric Hybrid and the 512 electric commuter car program. When this testing was completed, these 4 rollers were then delivered to the General Motors experimental garage in the days preceding October 14th of 1966. Approximately 3 months overdue by an engineer within the electric drive division, George Spix. Many within the development of this high-performance program had grown understandably impatient with the lack of the completed development, mock-up, and testing of this high-performance option. So an assembly line donor car had begun the process in their absence. This is the car we know today as the Riverside Z-28. Of those 4 returned rollers, 2 would become prototype Z-28s, N1-00030 and N1-00049. That would ultimately bring the pre-production totals of prototypes tested for the legendary RPO Z-28 program to 3, including the Riverside Z-28, 2 of which still exist today: the Riverside Z-28 and N1-00049. Of the remaining 2, N1-00028 and N1-00029, well, that's a story for another time. And the next time that you read or hear someone say, Chevrolet wasn't enthusiastically involved in the first year of Z-28 production, just remember, they were kind of busy taking Team Camaro to the moon.
By the way, that U.S. citizenship issue, George stood with Jalal that fateful day in 1970 when U.S. citizenship was granted and witnessed the process. What a friend. God bless you, George.